Hi, it's Drake, and I have today a book recommendation video for you. Um, and I also wanted to say that I've decided to start a Patreon. And I've been thinking about this for a while. I've been kind of conflicted about it because, uh, of course, I think these videos should be free and um, should be available for everyone, which that's not going to change. But I've had several people bring it up to me, why don't you have one, or what are you thinking about that? And I've been thinking about it for a while, over a year at least, and I decided, mainly through seeing other channels that I really like have Patreon accounts, and they work out really well. Like Jackson Crawford, he's the Old Norse specialist that, goes on mountains and makes really interesting videos about Old Norse and um, Old Norse culture and language. And he has a Patreon, and I think he does it the right way, basically, where he just kind of treats the Patreon as kind of an extra thing. Like, he uploads all of his videos, but then he has a Patreon where you can basically support him and treat it as kind of like a thank you for the knowledge that he gives out. And I like the way he does it. And then also, there's a guy, Crime Pays, but Botany Doesn't. He's kind of in the same way, where he's kind of basically a teacher or a professor, that sort of thing, where he goes out in places and looks at plants and gives you knowledge about it. And I don't think he has a Patreon, but he does a PayPal at least, where you can just throw some money in the bucket or whatever. So thinking of those two guys and thinking about it, and I decided, screw it, I'll give it a try. I'm not even sure if anyone's gonna give money. I don't deserve it anyway, but anyway, throwing that out there. And this video is going to act as an example of what I will be posting on Patreon. So it's going to be book recommendation videos for books that are like exceedingly rare, and therefore there are only maybe a couple copies available on the market. And if I post a video to, let's say hundreds or thousands of people, it will totally destroy the market for the book, in the sense that a book is going to cost $500, $1,000. So I think it makes sense then to post it on Patreon first for people who have the money to pay for something, or as like a little extra bonus, but then post the video later on YouTube, just so that the word gets out there for the book, in case it's reprinted, or in case you can download a PDF or an EPUB or something like that. So really, nobody loses anything. It's just a little bit of an early bonus, whatever. So that's the idea. We'll see how it goes. This is my first shot of it, so here's the book recommendation. It is The Empty Book by Josefina Vicens. And I first was led on to this book by Bartleby & Co. by Enrique Vila-Matas. And, he's a really interesting writer if you haven't heard of him. Friends with Sergio Pitol. Anyway, so it's just a book. That book itself is about, Bartleby, the scrivener, the character Bartleby, prefer not to. It's about writers who didn't write, or writers who stopped writing. And, it's an interesting idea, kind of like a, paradox or something you don't expect, irony, whatever. But anyway, it's a good book. You should read it. But he briefly mentions this book here and Josefina Vicens. And I kind of forgot about it, basically. But then I was looking through UT Press, and they publish it. This is published by UT, which is the university I just graduated from. So that made me look at it even more. And then I live in Austin, Texas, and I bought this book at a used bookstore in Austin, Texas for like $8, which I don't know why, but you can't find this book for less than like 500, which is completely unreasonable. So I hope that they either reprint it, or some more copies are found and they put it on the market or whatever. But even in Spanish, they're hard to come by, which I have no idea why. I mean, it's a good book, but it's not that good. I think it must have just been the publishers underestimated the market or something like that. But anyway, in Spanish it's called El Libro Vacío, the empty book. A little bit of a background of Josefina Vicens. She was roughly contemporary with Juan Rulfo, who did famous for Pedro Páramo, the other Mexican writer. And that book was published in 1955, and the empty book was published in 1958. They were almost exactly contemporary. And you can actually find a short, I guess you can call it maybe a documentary or interview or something with Josefina Vicens, where she talks about this anecdote about talking to Juan Rulfo and asking him like, or no, he asked her, well, why haven't you, where's your next book at? Your first book was so good, where's your next book? And she says, well, I just haven't written it. And then, she says to him, where's your next book? Because he hadn't written anything after Pedro Páramo in 1955. So just a little funny anecdote. But she was also around the same time as Octavio Paz. And then she even, I'll get into this a little bit, but she even preceded like the metafiction boom, Latin American boom, with things like Julio Cortázar, Rayuela, or it's another good example. Fernando del Paso, those sort of writers. So anyway, getting into the book, the idea of the book is it's from the first person of a guy named Jose Garcia. And he has two notebooks. The first notebook is the notebook that he tries to write in. That's his book that he writes. A lot of it ends up being in reflections on his life, difficulties with writing, things like that. The second book is the empty book. That's the book that is the final book. That's the book where he puts the things that he likes. That's the book where he puts the things that he was happy with, that he felt was successful. And that's the empty book. There's nothing in the book. Through the end of this book, he still has not put anything in his second notebook, which is the empty book, obviously. And so, of course, the whole story is told through the first notebook, which is the book that we get information from. And it mostly consists of his constant failures and disappointments in life. You might be immediately reminded of books like the Book of Disquiet, which I have here. Book of Disquiet. An interesting other connection with this book is that Josefina Vicens had many pseudonyms or pen names that she wrote under. She'd write under male writer names. She'd write under female writer names. There's this famous story about her that she famously was bad-mouthing a boxer. And he said, this writer, I can't remember who it was, what the name was, but it was some male writer name. And he said, meet me here at this hotel. I'm going to beat you up. I'll knock you out for saying such things about me. And she met him there at that time. But the guy didn't realize that it was her that had written all these things. So they were just having a pleasant conversation, passing the time. And then she just asked him, so, when are you going to beat me up? And then he says, what? And she says, I'm this guy. I'm the guy who said all these things about you. It's me. And then he's like, of course I can't hurt you. It was nice meeting you, ma'am. Have a good day. And then he just leaves, that sort of story. So she's kind of playful in that way and kind of subversive in that way, And this book ties into that, where I couldn't get it out of my mind that she was a female writer writing through a male character, because I think it also ties into it that this male character is very effeminate in the sense that not necessarily like the epitome of femininity or something like that, but just in the sense that he would be considered like a feminine man, kind of deferential, not especially confident in himself. His wife actually is more of the like straightforward leader parent that directs the children. So in that way, he kind of seems like a feminine man in like the 1950s paradigm that you can imagine this in. So in that way, it was hard for me to separate the fact that she was kind of making up this person. And even though you can imagine that, you can imagine a lot of these things that this character, Jose Garcia, is writing in his notebook. These are actually Josefina Vicens and her difficulty in writing this book, because this book took 10 years to write, actually. And then when it came out, it was one of her only early books, because I think at this point she was in her 40s. She did write, I believe, a couple other books, and then she wrote some screenplays and movie scripts and dramas and things, but this one she worked at for a while, and it's about the difficulty of even starting a novel, or the difficulty of even finding something worth saying when you're just such a normal person and there are millions of other versions of you walking around that could write just the same thing that you could write, so why would you write? But it also talks about the compulsion of writing, that this character constantly goes on hiatuses, forced hiatuses from writing. Okay, the next 6 months I will not write. I will not write for the next 6 months. This horrible obsession of mine, this worthless obsession to simply write my ideas, or try to write something worth saying. But then immediately after that, like literally the next second, we'll start writing this story about something that happened in their personal life, some personal failure. They might remember a time when they were younger where they were cheating on their wife. This character in the book is 56, but remembers a lot of times in the past. The main character, Jose Garcia, has a wife and 2 children, 2 sons. One, Jose, named after him, is going to school to be a lawyer. He's outgoing. He has aspirations in life, and his father can't really relate to him in that way. Then he has a younger son, whose name I'm blanking on right now. It's crazy. It starts with an L. Man, I can't believe I can't remember his name right now. I just finished reading it today. But anyways, younger son starts with an L. He has a lot of health problems and has a huge imagination, and doesn't have as many friends, and he has this necessary separation with people, and that's something that his father can relate to, having this imagination and wants to get out of the drudgery of life, that sort of thing. So in that way, it kind of touches on why people become writers, or why people are artists. Why do you need to invent things when the world is already there for you, And I just wanted to read a couple passages that I think are especially good. So let's see. So this is when one of his sons is asking him about this book he's writing, because he always goes up to his room and alone and writes in this, book. It's a novel, right, Daddy? And then, with that fascination for the silver screen typical for his age, does it have a happy ending? Violently, I just now told him to leave. He opened his huge eyes in surprise. I don't think I've done him any harm. I'm sure, how shameful to write it down, that his young, generous imagination will conclude, writers are so strange and different from other people. And I hope that in his eyes I will appear to not be unjust. I will appear to be not unjust but creative. One who has to be put up with because he's a writer. Maybe he'll tell his friends with a slight tone of pride in his voice, my father writes. He's already well along in his book, and perhaps one of his friends, a clerk's or businessman's son, will feel a certain envy at heart and wish that his father could also be a writer. What a sham. I should have responded honestly to his sign of interest by saying, I'm not a writer, I'm not. What you see here, this notebook full of words and erasures, is nothing more than the barren result of a desperate tyranny of some unknown origin. All of this, and everything I'll be writing here, is just to say nothing, and the end result will be a heap of full pages and an empty book. It's not a novel, son, and it doesn't have a happy ending. It can't finish what it doesn't begin, because I have nothing to say. Your father isn't a writer, and he will never be. That gives you an idea of the narrator's voice and personal disposition. But also I wanted to read a passage from a later section of the book where this almost feels more like Josefina Vicens talking through it, because this is a major development for the writer. Like, if you imagine the book itself is what's growing throughout the empty book, the writing itself, rather than the character necessarily is growing. This is where the writing kind of takes a mind of its own, so to say, or I'll just read it so you can get an idea. Let's see. I'm not an artist. If I really were, I'd have a certainty within me, even though perhaps out of modesty I wouldn't show it. My wife, my children, my job wouldn't be the center of my life, but only the contour, a hazy profile instead of this rigid, unalterable frame. The artist, a being who's different, wounded for life since birth, who finds it hard to be a part of the day-to-day reality. Of course, there are some who extract the best elements from that reality, but noticing it well enough to give it form and transform it into a work of art is the best proof that they haven't been able to become part of the reality themselves, that they haven't been swallowed up by it. They describe it with such perfection that it's as if they'd broken off a piece of it. What's different about it is what only the great artists achieve, a reality we have always known about, and nevertheless notice for the first time. Right now, I understand perfectly that a person obsessed by the need of doing something specific, who's also a prisoner of work obligations and a family, may decide to give it all up forever. I'm so fed up and worn out by this stupid life. I've neither the time nor the peace of mind to do anything different. I go insane trapped in between so many exact days cut to fit a mold. Every time Rafael Acosta, who has a desk calendar, rips off the page belonging to the day's date, I feel as if he's ripping out a piece of my own life. One more day of work, one less day to live. So much the better. Sometimes I wish I could die so that I don't have to see how often my office mate rips off that calendar page. And I think those passages sum up the book really well, but if you can find a copy, I would highly recommend The Empty Book. And also, another book that I thought of as I was talking about it is Monsieur Test by Paul Valery. And that is about a book written about Monsieur Test, who is supposedly like the most brilliant guy that this guy's ever met, but Monsieur Test himself doesn't write anything. And there's a line in there somewhere that the best writers would be the ones that never wrote. So this kind of ties into that idea, that Bartleby and Co. idea. So, well, anyway, I hope you thought this book recommendation was valuable. Like I said, these are going to be the type of things I do for my Patreon. So if you feel exceptionally generous, or if you've liked the stuff I've talked about, or if you're interested in seeing more, the Patreon basically will just give me more freedom of time to read more books, and then more freedom of money to buy more books. And those will allow me to give you guys more information about books. So anyway, don't feel obligated. I will be continually uploading things that I always upload, whether or not anyone is generous enough to give me anything. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed this, and as always, death is a gang boss.